Here to show you how to optimize your inventory and increase profitability is John Manganaro, Vice President of Pricing and Analytics with Driven. Please give him a warm welcome.
So we're going through an interesting period in the automotive industry right now. In the new car world, incentives have been stronger than ever, maintaining a really steady peak and plateau towards the ends of the year. New car sales were extremely strong in 2016. Now, this led to an influx of newer model off-lease vehicles and fleet vehicles coming into the wholesale channels. And the NAAA showed that 9.8 million vehicles ran through auctions last year, and they're estimating over 10 million in 2017. We're inundated with numbers like this from reports across the industry outlets, and the NADA January used car market report had a really interesting quote as well. December's soft performance dragged NADA Used Car Guide's seasonally adjusted used vehicle price index down 1.4% from November to 114.8. December's index figure was also 6.5% lower than December 2015, marked the lowest point reached since February 2011. The index has now declined 6 months in a row. Depreciation on used vehicles was higher in 2016 than 2015, and all of these numbers are connected. So on top of the new and used vehicle metrics in the industry, we see both new and established companies within the industry offering solutions to alleviate these problems, to address them for our dealer partners. Software, hardware, recruiting methods, training methods, retention methods. Dealers across the country have so many options to choose from now, on top of all the data and metrics used to solve these problems. So maybe that's what brought you here today, to learn something and bring it back to your dealership that's valuable to the business, and I hope to deliver just that. So this workshop covers a methodology we use at Driven called the optimal lot. We're going to discuss that today and go through each step by step, and also share data and real stories of dealers we work with and the effects of implementing this methodology. It's not a software solution, it's not a product, it's simply a structure to a problem that dealerships can use, bring back into the rooftops, and hopefully update their used car sourcing strategy in order to gain better profits. So looking at the 3 pillars of the optimal lot, it's broken down into 3 sections. And the first section we're going to talk about is understanding your audience and targeting a customer segment that's right for your dealership. The second pillar is going to talk about marketing position. How does your dealer stand out in your market, and also identify what your true market reach is. The third and final step is going to be selecting inventory to target your market and establish your brand position in the market as well. These are very much sequential. We're going to start at number 1, go to 2 and 3, and that order should be repeated when you bring this into your dealership as well. And like I said before, we're going to go through specific examples for each of these pillars of how dealers implemented this, some of the obstacles they overcame, and some of the effects of implementing the methodology. So let's get started. Targeting your customer audience deals with customer segmentation. This is starting to happen in the auto industry a little bit more. It's extremely prevalent in e-commerce sites, online companies such as Netflix and Spotify and Pandora, Amazon. When you see things like people like you also like this, people who purchased X also purchased Y. What these companies are doing is they're tracking your user behavior on their sites, what TV shows you like, what products you buy, and they're learning from your interactions as they go. It's not just about what you purchase, it's how you purchase it. It's what you do on their website, what you click, how long you take to shop, how much you watch a certain type of TV show. And what they end up doing is putting individuals into buckets of like behavior people. So for instance, if I like to watch a bunch of action movies on Netflix, but I also seem to have some romantic comedies on certain days or months of the year, there'll be other people like me that share those behavioral traits, and those companies will put users into specific buckets based on their behaviors. That's what we're going to talk about today with dealerships. And the way to start off, there's really 3 levels of data that you can gather from a customer that's a used car shopper in your dealership. The top level is going to be demographic data. This is very standard stuff that you can get from a shopper. They're very open to sharing. They realize it's fairly public information. That deals with age, gender, income, family size. Geography is a big part of this as well. How far they are away from your dealership. Do they live in an urban or rural area? These are all demographic data points that are fairly standard. They don't really help you get to the next level though. They're important to gather, But the next step is something that goes one level deeper, and that's psychographic information. Psychographic data deals with interests and hobbies. If I have a large family, that's demographic, but if my 3 sons and I play basketball every weekend, that gives you a different level of information about the customer. Now you know something about their behaviors, their hobbies, their interests. If I like to go hunting and I have 4 chocolate labs that I take out with me into the woods, it's fairly intuitive to say maybe this guy doesn't want to see a 2-door coupe today. He might be looking more for an SUV. You can start to gain intuitions and gain understanding a little bit when you gather this data. And the psychographic information brings you to the next level of detail. The final level of detail is probably the most telling in my opinion, and this is behavioral data. Similar to the data I talked about before, when you're using Spotify or Netflix or some of those companies. In an auto dealer, behavioral data is stuff like this. How did I first contact the dealership? Did I have an established purchase price before I came into the dealership, or did I show up on the lot unannounced, maybe with some papers printed out from online, looking for a sales rep to help me pick a car? Do I know exactly what VIN I want to buy, or am I still balancing between 2 or 3 cars? The last time I purchased a car, I actually went back and forth 18 times over an email with the sales rep to establish a price. I put all of my financing information up front, and I really wanted to limit the amount of time I spent in a dealership, but that was specific to my behavior. Another person, like I said before, could really use a consultative hand. They could use an educated consultative advisor on the used car lot to help them make a purchasing decision. They like the hand holding. They want the time investment from the dealership, and that's a different behavioral trait from that dealer. So the difficult part for really putting this together isn't so much tracking this data. A lot of salespeople, a lot of folks in the finance department, service department, they hear this data, they know their customers, but the impact of logging it and putting it into a file format where other people in the dealership can gain information from it, and from management in the organization can understand what types of customers are coming in, is the true value to this step. And I'll give you a specific example. We were working with a dealer in Chicago. We talked about customer segmentation data. He was a little skeptical at first. I was talking to a general manager in the dealership, and he said, a lot of my guys are really good at gathering this. I believe we have a pretty good feel for who our customers are and why they shop with us. And I said, great, can we pull some of them in here and just do a really quick survey? And he said, sure, anybody who's not helping a customer on the floor, please come into the office, we're gonna do a quick exercise. So one of his top sales reps, let's just call him Mike, was in the room and he said, Mike, talk about the last few cars you sold this week. And he was able to spit out all of this information very quickly off the top of his head. I sold this VIN to this person, listed all the information he could gather on them right off the top of his head because it was very fresh. It was very new. We went back 6 weeks, and I said, who did you sell to 6 weeks ago? How many cars did you sell that week? Who did you sell them to? Tell me what you can remember about those customers. As expected, the further back you go, it's a little harder to pull that information off the top of your head. It's something that's really relevant, new. As you further distance yourself from those events, it's a little more difficult to recall. So that was one reason we said we need to start establishing this in a format we can reference. The other reason is more important. As much as Mike knows all about his customers, the other reps he works with, the other used car guys, the other salespeople, the other people in the dealership don't know what he knows. He knows what he knows. There's no documentation anywhere. There's nothing that someone can reference outside of Mike's brain that gets to the level of information he has from his experience. And this is what we came up with. A CRM tool or a DMS tool will probably have the capability of logging this information as needed. If you have one of those tools that you like, I absolutely think you should stick with that. In Mike's instance, they really didn't have a great one in-house, according to his opinion. So we built an Excel spreadsheet together. Each row was a customer, each tab was a salesperson, and each column was a behavioral data point we captured from that customer. We had demographic information to start, we had psychographic information in the middle columns, and finally we had behavioral data. And we tested this with a couple of the used car guys for a week or so, and it really just took 3 or 4 minutes of their time throughout a process to log this information as they gathered it. Maybe as someone came on the lot, they spent an hour with them, they took this information down, the customer wasn't ready to purchase, they went home to look it over, sales rep would open up the spreadsheet, fill out the information he found out, capture it in a format that everybody could reference. We did this for about 6 to 8 weeks, and they really started to log some good information. And here's what the value that came out of that was. As a dealership, They could track all the different types of customers coming in and look for patterns of buyers. You do this for people that ended up buying, you do this for people that ended up not buying. And you look at some of the differences at a very high level, and you can start to see patterns. You can start to see that, for instance, someone who comes onto the lot, who is the person that just has never talked to the dealership yet, this is the first contact is showing up. This type of person closes at a rate of 75% when they deal with someone versus, let's say, someone like me who likes to email back and forth and really get a price established. Maybe the people who behave like me have a closing ratio of about 50%. So you can start to see patterns that maybe certain aspects of our company, certain aspects of our dealership are more aligned to that person looking for a consultative approach that comes onto the lot and wants to learn more about a vehicle. They want to learn more about the dealership before making a decision. At a high level, that's a really impactful solution. Something that can be a little more impactful, that's actually really granular and interesting, is as a dealership management team, you can start to see patterns on your used car salespeople and the types of customers they're better at closing. For instance, if I'm a very patient used car person, I like the consultative approach. I like to spend half my day with a customer in hopes that I've earned their trust and I've established a strong relationship with them, not only to sell the vehicle, but to return for servicing, to use our financing department. Maybe my skill set as a salesperson is really tailored to building that rapport. Another salesperson could be less patient, but extremely efficient of turning the people around who want to spend an hour to 2 hours in the dealership, have as much of that information tied up and aligned before they ever step foot on the lot. And that salesperson's really good at handling that type of lead. So from a management perspective, you can start to gather this data on each customer and even decide based on the shopper behavior, which of your salespeople will give you the highest chance of closing that customer as a win. This is very easy to do. The hard part is capturing the data and being really diligent with your team and having them understand the importance and impact of doing this. So that's target segmentation. We'll jump into market positioning now. And there's a few steps here you see on the slide which are important. At the end of this, we really want to understand what differentiates your dealership. What makes you different in your market, and who are you competing against to earn your target customer segments? So first off, this is one of my favorite exercises. In a couple slides, I'm going to show you an example of this. But defining your target market is a really important exercise to do. It's not simply understanding your market reach in terms of how you're spending your marketing dollars, how far you're trying to attract shoppers, how much media space you're buying in a certain distance from your dealership. There's a very simple exercise that's part of our digital handout attached to this deck that I have my dealerships do whenever I work with them, and it's actually a really impactful data visualization exercise. Using your CRM or DMS, download a year's worth of data of customers who've purchased vehicles from your dealership. Have their names, have their addresses, have the vehicle they bought, say make, model, the price they paid, and the gross profit that your dealership realized from that customer, and put it into an Excel spreadsheet. Most of these tools have a very easy export button that allows you to do this. Go to Google Maps, and you can upload this spreadsheet into your own map for your dealership. And you put the dealership address on the top, the map centers it right on your dealership, and all of these thumbtacks drop onto the map from the customers who have purchased your car. And you can see geographically where customers are coming from. You can start to see pockets. Maybe going west, your reach goes a lot further than going east, and you start to see little holes come up in your thumbtacks. You start to see pockets of customers that were once very thick start to become very thin as you go in a certain direction. The reason you add the other data points beside their addresses are you can cut and slice the data in a lot of interesting ways. If you are a franchise dealer, you can say, show me only the customers who bought on brand and show me how far they've traveled. How about off brand? Let's see how far they've traveled. What happens to my gross profit as customers travel further versus those that travel close by? You can see all of this data very quickly just filtering through the thumbtacks on Google Maps. It's a very intuitive tool, and it's a 6-step process to upload this data. It took me about 15 minutes the first time I tried it. So you'll visually see where your customers are traveling from. And the second step of this gets into the competitive analysis piece on our slide. When you see these pockets, these holes start to form around your geography, a very interesting additional data point to put in here are other dealerships that you consider to be your competition. So you can make these thumbtacks a different color. In a lot of cases, areas where you see your customers start to thin out, there's going to be another dealership rooftop up there. If you're a on-brand franchise dealer, maybe a competing brand is stealing customers out there. Maybe it's the same brand as you that's 25 miles away. You're a Ford dealer and another Ford dealer 20 miles away has actually established a really good tranche in their area of stealing customers really close to their dealership. This is going to be fairly intuitive. You're going to know the dealerships in your area. You're going to know what their brand reputation is from your experience in the market. And simply understanding what happens to your customers as these dealerships pop up will have a very telling story for your dealership. So now that we know how far your customers are willing to travel, we have a competitive data visualization technique in Google Maps to see where your customers are. Let's figure out how you're differentiating from other dealerships that are your competition. So we talk a lot at conferences, a lot of times with your vendor partners about differentiating beyond price. Don't get into a price competition with every customer. Customers do put value into experiences beyond price. We talked about customer segments before, and let's not forget that part of the process. And the second part of the process, understand what's important to your customers, and this is how you differentiate. A lot of times when you see commercials on TV or you hear them on the radio or you look at sites, dealerships talk about how long they've been in the market. We've been a family-owned and operated business for 75 years in the St. Louis market area. You know our family, we're very involved in the community. All of these are good things. But if your competitors are saying the same thing as you aren't differentiating. You're at a stalemate. You and your competitors are using the same message to attract customers, so no one's actually winning. You're just kind of stalled. Find out what really makes your dealer different and important to your customer targets. Let's use the example before. Let's say my dealership is really good at the red carpet treatment. We find people that may take a little bit longer to actually purchase, but we find that when they come to us, we have a really high retention rate in servicing. We have a really high throughput on our financing department. And they may be that we have a really good extended warranty program that these folks come back to us for. They really trust us, and that's the reputation we've built in our market. Be very specific with your target marketing message. Explain to those customers that are hearing your messages, that are watching your commercials, you are tailor fit for my rooftop, and here's why. Maybe it doesn't matter that you've been around for 75 years. Maybe people don't care about your community involvement. It's not that they're bad things. It's just that your target customer segments really need to be aligned to your message. So as a dealership group, sit down together and try to understand what the message is going to be and how nobody else in the market can beat you at that message. So this is my favorite slide coming up, and it's going to be a slide where we worked with a dealership in the Midwest, very well-known group. We had one of his stores in the Midwest, and we said, let's try to define your market area. What do you think your market reach is from your dealership? And he said, I use a pricing tool, and whenever I price my vehicles to market, I like to extend it to about 150 to 250 miles, which is really the amount I need to get the minimum number of vehicles to put a realistic price on the car. I need to see 15 to 20 examples of this type of car, so I feel comfortable putting a price on it. So I expand it to about 150 to 250 miles, depending. And I said, great. What percentage of your shoppers over Q4 last year traveled more than 200 miles to your store to buy a car? And I said, just think about this before you throw a number out, and let's just try to find the right answer. And he said, I'd probably guess right around 10%. Maybe plus or minus 1 or 2%. Right around 10% of the customers I sold cars to in Q4 traveled over 200 miles to get there. So we took his data, like I said before, put it in a spreadsheet, and put it on a Google map. This is what happened. The first column is how many people out of 325 were within a 10-mile radius of his dealership. It's about 53%. The second bucket, maybe it's a little hard to see, it's 11 to 25 miles out, about 80. So we have 251 out of 325 people within 25 miles of his dealership over Q4. Now we have a bucket of 26 to 50 miles, 35, 51 to 100, 21, 100 to 200 miles, 9, 200 miles, 5. 5 out of 325 people traveled that far. This was fairly eye-opening to him. He didn't realize how strong they had captured local markets, and they actually spent a decent amount of time and effort trying to expand their reach to that 200-mile radius. The reason why he was able to think, or he thought more people traveled farther, is because These 9 and 5 customers that did travel are a little different. They stand out a bit more. They're a stranger story, so they differentiate themselves in our head and memory a little bit because they are so willing to travel. He was able to tell a story about someone that traveled beyond 400 miles to his dealership because he had a very unique VIN that was hard to find. That's fine, but it's a very small percentage of your overall sales. It's a very small percentage of his overall sales. And really what we took away from this was focusing our efforts on that 50-mile radius and owning it as hard as we could. And if you do use pricing tools, pricing to market is incredibly important. I'm completely in line with doing that. However, if you're expanding a tool to 250 miles to price your car, but over 90% of your customers are within 50 miles of your dealership, you really need to price within that 50-mile band, regardless if you can find the minimum number of vehicles needed to put a price on that car. If your market is 50-mile radius and you're pricing to 250 miles, you are not pricing to your market. But it's not fair just to say, looking at the number of shoppers that came in, let's talk about the profitability of these customers. Maybe the folks that are willing to travel farther are actually way more profitable and worth our time and effort. So we sliced the data a different way. He was a franchise dealer, and we cut them into on-brand purchasers and off-brand purchasers. And we said, not only do we keep our mileage bands, let's understand the front-end gross on each of these customers, on-brand and off-brand, and how far they traveled to our dealership. So we came up with this slide. On the left-hand side, you're going to see on-brand commissions. They're fairly consistent. They do bounce up a little bit, but it's a fairly even line until we get to about 100 to 200 miles dips a little bit down, and you'll see the 200 mile plus actually go negative. They sold these vehicles at a loss. So he thought this was really interesting. This is like odd. Why do you think that is? And I said, I don't really know much about the customers, but let's think about this intuitively for a second. If I'm willing to drive 200 miles where there's probably plenty of dealerships in between you and me, why would I drive all 4 extra hours to get to your dealership and purchase a car? Off the top of my head, I would imagine I'm a very price-sensitive customer. I'm willing to spend 3 or 4 hours in a car to save $300 or $400 on a purchase. We looked at an on-brand, we're looking at on-brand. We plotted how many other on-brand dealerships just like his were between him and those customers, and there were 2 or 3. He had plenty of opportunities to go to other stores that could sell the same vehicles as him. He drove past a few of them to get to our dealership, probably because he was very price sensitive and this dealership was willing to give him the best price. Off-brand commission is a more telling story. The closer the shoppers are to the dealership, the higher their commission is, but the further away they get, commissions start to drop down. The profitability of those customers starts to drop. Now, before you look at the 200 mile plus bar and you see it spike back up, remember this is only about 2 customers over a 3-month period. About 2 people traveled over 200 miles to buy an off-brand car from this person. Their gross is very high. It's the highest bar on all of them, but the number of people is very small. Again, we looked at these outliers. We wanted to understand what was going on. He happened to have some rare off-brand vehicles that no one in his market or anywhere near his market was carrying. These shoppers really wanted that car, and they were willing to pay a premium for it. So they traveled over 200 miles to his dealership. They purchased that car, and they were a profitable customer. But in the grand scheme of things, we're talking about 1 or 2 people out of over 300. Not really worth your time and effort to market those people, but it's a nice gift when they do come onto your lot. So like I said before, this is very real data. These are things that you can pull very quickly, and they're usually fairly eye-opening experiences. So what we took away from this step was basically saying, let's really own that 50-mile reach. Let's look at who else we consider our primary competitors within a 50-mile radius. Let's look at their inventory. Let's follow what they sell. Let's see how good they are at moving that inventory. How long do these vehicles last on their lot? If I'm a Ford dealer again, who else is selling my brand within my 50-mile radius? Who else is trying to take my customers from my market, and how do I win them back? This is a very strategic plan. It's going to be different for every dealership. There's not an answer to this. There's not a simple book you can read or article I could publish. This is a conversation you need to have at a strategic level and make a plan going forward to own your market. So that's step 2. Step 3 is the final piece, which is inventory selection. So attracting the right shopper and converting them to a buyer with the right inventory on your lot. Now, if you use tools to have that give suggestions on what to stock, that tell you which vehicles would be a good fit for your lot, You're armed with your customer segmentation piece. You're armed with your competitive analysis, and now you can better use these tools to look for vehicles that fit your lot. It's not just a suggestion of a vehicle anymore because there's a shortage. There's an undersupply of this type of vehicle in your market. You should consider purchasing it. Well, before I purchase it, will my target segments want this car? And am I established in my market to position and win that buyer against my competition? Yes and yes, I'm ready to go on this car. If one of those is no, then you should stop and really think about why this vehicle is being suggested to you. Why should I purchase this car if I really don't have the alignment between my customers and my market? These are why the first two steps are important and why the sequential order is important in this exercise. So when you come into your lot, when you bring in this methodology for the first time, you're going to look at your vehicle inventory. Let's say you have 100 cars. You're going to look at that lot for the first time, and you need to self-assess it. You're going to say, look, we know our customers, we know our position in the market. Let's take a look at what we have now and figure out what we want to do with it. So you're going to take a look at these cars objectively. You're going to see how long they've been on the lot. You're going to see how much you're in them for. And you're going to start to say, okay, well, these seem pretty aligned. Maybe these ones don't. These ones over here, maybe we need to get rid of. But before you do anything, I want to finish this presentation talking about a few biases that all people are subject to. This is not an industry-specific problem. This is a human being specific problem. So the framework and mindset when you purchase a car or take one in on trade is very positive, forward thinking. How do I position this to make the most amount of front-end profit? How do I maximize my return on this investment? How do I get the most out of this vehicle? At a certain point, there's going to be a line in the sand where your methodology and mentality needs to switch. It's what happens if I keep this car and don't sell it? What happens if I wholesale it now or drop the retail price to basically what I'm in for it just so I can get it off my lot? What do I lose if I continue to hold this car? This is a very hard mind shift to take. You're basically saying, I'm going from a really positive, hopeful outcome to minimizing a loss. I need to stop the bleeding. A lot of people struggle with this. They feel like it's admitting defeat. They feel like they're being negative when they should be being positive. And that's just not the case. Remember, we have processes and we have outcomes. We have decisions and we have outcomes. If you've made the right decision to purchase a vehicle and the outcome isn't great, that's okay. You just need to realize it, shift your mentality, and get out of the vehicle as quickly as possible, which brings us to our first bias. This is called outcome bias. And let's use an example. Let's pretend that I have a standard, fair, 6-sided die. I sit with you at a table, and I said, this is a game we're going to play. If I rolled this die, and it comes up as 6, you owe me $20. Any other number, I owe you $20. Would you take this bet? Any rational person would. One number I win, 5 numbers you win, same amount of money on the table. If we played this game for infinity, I would quickly go broke. But let's say I roll the die for the first time and a 6 comes up. You have to pay me $20. Was it a bad decision to play this game, or did you have a bad outcome? It was an outcome. You had a bad outcome, but the decision to play was sound. Think of a different example. Let's say your favorite basketball team is playing on TV. Final Four, point guard runs up to half court, heaves up a shot from half court, and drains the shot with 5 seconds left, and the team wins the game. Was that a good decision? Before you immediately answer yes, remember we're talking about decisions, we're talking about outcomes. The outcome was good, but the decision answer is it depends. If his team was down by 2, he was running up the court, heaves up a half court shot, and his team wins, great decision, great outcome, everybody's happy. But imagine for a second if his team was up 2. If his team was winning by 2, he ran up to half court and launched a half court shot. While that ball is in the air, are you screaming, what a great decision? Or are you screaming, what are you doing? Please hold on to the ball. Our team is about to win, and you do something stupid like that. This is a difference between a decision and an outcome. Why is that important for a dealership? If you have a process that works, if your strategy for aligning your customers, getting your competitive edge, and purchasing your inventory is sound, it's not going to be perfect. You're going to have things that happen that are just bad outcomes, even though the decision to get into that car and price it effectively was correct. You can't look at those in a negative way and have it ruin the decision process. There's always going to be instances where something, for whatever reason, doesn't work out. It's not someone's fault. We hear used car managers and wholesale directors, all these types of folks in the dealership say, anytime something goes wrong, I never hear the end of it. I get pounded by the GM, the principal's reaming me, I never hear the end of it. I have to stay in this car, I have to retail out of it for a profit, or I'm never, ever gonna live it down in-house. That's bad. You should really please stop doing that, because if the decision to make that car, put that car on your lot was correct, the outcome is hopeful that it works out, but if it doesn't, again, we switch the mentality to minimize our losses and replace it with another vehicle we think is primed to sell. It's incredibly important not to fall victim to outcome bias. Recency bias, a little less common, but definitely something we hear, and I'll give you an example of this as well. I was sitting with a dealer group about to meet with several of their rooftops. Used car managers and buyers were at the table, and unsolicited, before the meeting started, one of the directors put his hands down and said, I need you guys to get out of the habit of selling a car really quickly, turning a vehicle in 15 days, running out to the auction and trying to buy 3 more of it right away. Don't do that. I know you just hit a home run and you're waiting for that fastball to come down again. You just sold a car, made a bunch of money, and turned it in 2 weeks. Resist the urge to immediately run out and replace it with 3 more. I'll give you an extreme example as to why. In the Chicago market, we were working with a dealership that was not a BMW dealer, but he was good at selling 3 Series. He had found a little bit of a niche where he was able to turn some off-brand inventory, 3 Series BMWs in his market. He was pretty good at it. So he had turned 3 or 4 fairly quickly off his lot. And he basically came to us and said, hey, I need some help finding a few more. And I said, well, before we do that, let's just take a quick look at your market data and understand if this is still a good purchase decision for you. A BMW dealer about 6 miles away from him, earlier that week, posted over 60 3 Series on his lot within a 2-day period. 6-0, all in a 2-day stretch. Very odd, very extreme, but it happened. He had basically said, for whatever reason, I'm sick of anybody around me trying to steal my business. I'm going to flood the market with 3 Series, and I will own it, and I will cause everybody that tries to go against me to suffer for it. We avoided a mistake of trying to repurchase 2 or 3 missing 3 Series for our dealership because something changed in the market, even though it was in a very short time period. A lot can happen in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks when you turn a vehicle, and it's important not to immediately jump in and try to repeat that success, but rather be diligent, stop, take a look at your data. I don't have a slide for this, but the last bias I want to talk about is negativity bias. Negativity bias is very interesting. There's a behavioral economist and mathematician named Daniel Kahneman, who was one of the early people to write about behavioral economics. He has a really interesting book called Thinking Fast and Slow, if you want to take a look at it. All of these kind of fall under something he calls loss aversion. And negativity bias is one of the strongest examples of this. When we gain something, when something good happens to us, we basically have a certain level of good feeling or positive feeling out of it. If you came up to me and gave me a $100 bill for absolutely no reason, I would receive a certain amount of benefit from that in my life. I would receive a certain amount of joy, a quantifiable, measurable amount of positive utilization I get out of that $100 bill. If you were to immediately take it away from me, maybe 10 minutes later, the negative impact of that is much, much stronger than the positive impact. In many cases, when people tested this, the negative outcome is 8 to 10 times stronger than the positive one. We remember negative things more. When you talk to athletes, they remember painful losses and how much that hurts and how much they have to carry that with them versus the joy of a championship, the joy of a win. They remember losing, they remember the games they lost in much more clarity than the ones that they've won. And it's a very common trait amongst people at that level. What does this have to do with the dealership? In more than one occasion, we've gone to a dealership and we positioned maybe an off-brand vehicle or a vehicle they're not used to selling and saying, you know, looking at your customer segments, looking at your position in the marketplace, we think you're really primed to sell this make model. I don't want to buy that car. I bought one of those 7 years ago. It was a total piece of junk. It cost me thousands of dollars. I will never stock one of those cars again. If you're looking at a 1 or 2 off instance where a certain type of car has burned you and you're saying, I will never purchase that type of car again, you're falling into this negative bias. You're falling into this negativity bias, and it's going to hurt you going forward. I know there's this really positive glow around the mentality of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm doing fine. Maybe I could do better. What I'm doing well works. What I'm doing well works now. If you're coasting and you're on the top of the mountain, that's a dangerous mentality. There's people below you that are gunning for you. And if you're just saying, what I'm doing works, I'm not really willing to change it, I'm not willing to look at new inventory, I'm not willing to look at this new methodology for stocking my inventory, there are people below you that are gunning for you. Maybe there's some folks below you that just don't have much to lose anymore. You're kicking their butts, and they're saying, you know what, I'm gonna go after this guy and I'm willing to try something new. The most dangerous place to be is at the top of the mountain enjoying a picnic when people are running up the mountain to dethrone you. These biases can often get in the way. So wrapping up again, just quickly summarizing what we talked about, why you should optimize your inventory and how you should do it. You look at your target audience, you talk about the data points we talked about earlier, you figure out a way for your team to buy into this process, to use something on a consistent basis, to be diligent, even though it takes a little bit of time to do this. Capture the data points you think are necessary for your customers. Understanding your market position. This is not a half an hour conversation over lunch with a couple people. This is a very long, arduous meeting, but it's very impactful. I've been a part of quite a few. People are going to have different opinions. You need to be able to share those. You need to be able to argue. You need to be able to come to a conclusion at the end that people are bought into about what your market area is and how you're going to own it. As I said before, there's no textbook answer to this. It's going to be different for every rooftop that does this. And finally, we look at our inventory selection and be mindful of the biases we talk about. Be mindful of traps you could fall into. Look at the inventory selection you have, get rid of things that don't match your customer segments, and fill them with things that do. It sounds simple. The hardest part about implementing this is giving it the time and attention it needs. This is not a set it and forget it methodology. This is not something you start with and hope everybody just uses. It starts with buy-in. It starts from the top down. It starts from GMs and principals and owners saying this is important. If you're too time constrained to do this, let me know, and I will help you find time to do this because this is a priority for our rooftop. When I've seen dealers do that, the adoption of this is incredible. When I see people just say, hopefully this works, we'll throw it out there and hopefully our guys use it, it can quickly fall apart. People need to be bought in and they need to have the time and energy to be able to put into this, but it does have a profound effect. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. And again, take a look at the handout and understand how you can upload your customer data into Google and take a look at your market reach. Thank you.